The Galactic Council chambers buzzed with tension as delegates from 47 different species filled the massive amphitheater. Marcus Chen adjusted his human delegation badge and tried not to stare at the incredible diversity around him. Crystalline beings that chimed when they moved sat next to floating gas bag creatures that communicated through color changes. But everyone's attention was fixed on the center of the chamber, where a magnificent dragon lay motionless on a specially designed platform. Seraphina Drakthos had once been the pride of the Draconian Empire. Her scales shimmered like molten gold, and her amber eyes held the wisdom of 3 centuries. She was their greatest diplomat, the one who had negotiated peace between warring systems and brokered trade agreements that benefited countless worlds. But now, those powerful wings that had once carried her across star systems hung limp at her sides. The attack had happened 6 months ago during a peace mission to the Outer Rim. Pirates had used an experimental neural disruptor, a weapon so cruel it had been banned by every civilized species. The device didn't kill, but it severed the connection between mind and body below the point of impact. For a creature whose very identity was tied to flight and movement, it was a fate worse than death. Marcus watched as the Zephyrian ambassador approached Seraphina's platform. The bird-like alien's feathers ruffled with barely contained disgust. The Draconian Empire sends a cripple to represent them in these crucial negotiations. The ambassador squawked, his translator rendering his words in perfect standard galactic. How can we take seriously a delegation led by someone who cannot even stand? A ripple of uncomfortable murmurs spread through the chamber. Several delegates nodded in agreement, their various forms of body language all conveying the same message. In galactic politics, physical presence and capability mattered. It was an ancient prejudice that transcended species. Seraphina's great head lifted slightly, her eyes flashing with pain that went beyond the physical. I assure you, Ambassador Crickthole, that my mind remains sharp even if my body has been compromised. The Draconian Empire's position on the Andromedean trade routes requires careful consideration, and I am here to ensure our interests are protected. Your interests? The crystalline delegate's voice resonated like broken glass. You cannot even move yourself to the negotiation table. How can you protect anything? Marcus felt his jaw clench. He'd seen this before, in the military hospitals back on Earth. Good soldiers, heroes who had given everything for their brothers and sisters in arms, suddenly treated like broken things once they returned home, different than when they'd left. It didn't matter that their courage remained intact, that their knowledge and experience were invaluable. People saw the chair, the prosthetics, the paralysis, and decided that person was somehow less. The human delegation hadn't been scheduled to speak today. Earth was still considered a minor player in galactic politics, their species having only joined the Council 15 years ago. But Marcus stood anyway, his movement causing several nearby delegates to turn their attention toward him. If I may, Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. He was a big man, built like the space marine he'd once been, and his presence commanded attention even here among beings who dwarfed him in size and power. Chancellor Vorth, a massive slug-like creature who served as the Council's presiding officer, gestured with one of his many tentacles. The human delegation recognizes that today's session is focused on the Andromedean situation. Do you have something relevant to contribute? Marcus stepped forward, moving toward Seraphina's platform. I do, Chancellor, but first I'd like to address something that seems to be clouding the judgment of several distinguished delegates here today. The chamber fell silent. It was unthinkable for a member of such a junior species to address the Council's senior delegates so directly, but Marcus had faced down worse things than political protocol. 6 months ago, pirates used an illegal weapon against Ambassador Seraphina, a weapon so horrific that every species in this chamber voted to ban it. They didn't target her because she was weak. They targeted her because she was strong, because her diplomatic efforts had cost them millions of credits in lost illegal activity. Marcus reached Seraphina's platform and placed his hand gently on her massive foreleg. The scales were warm to the touch, and he could feel the slight tremor that ran through her body, the involuntary response of a nervous system trying desperately to reconnect with itself. On my world, we have a saying, it's not the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the dog. Ambassador Seraphina didn't become one of the galaxy's greatest diplomats because she could fly. She became great because of what's up here, he tapped his temple, and in here, he placed his hand over his heart. The Zephyrian ambassador's feathers ruffled indignantly. Pretty words, human, but words don't change reality. She cannot function in her role. Look at her. She requires assistance for the most basic functions. You're right, Marcus said, surprising everyone, including Seraphina. She does need assistance. And you know what? So do all of you. The chamber erupted in protests and angry vocalizations. Marcus waited for the noise to die down before continuing. Ambassador Crichthol, you require a specialized atmosphere mask to survive outside your homeworld's environment. Does that make you weak? Delegate Zixandor, he gestured to the crystalline being, your species literally falls apart at certain sonic frequencies. You need harmonic dampeners just to attend these sessions safely. Are you somehow less capable because of that? Marcus began walking around the chamber, his voice growing stronger. Every species here has adaptations they need to function outside their natural environment. Humans need pressure suits in space. Aquatic species need water recycling systems on dry worlds. The Mollusk Confederation requires temperature-controlled environments. None of you would dream of calling each other weak or incapable because of these needs. He stopped and turned back to face Seraphina. The only difference is that Ambassador Seraphina's needs became visible 6 months ago instead of being something she was born with. Her disability doesn't define her capability any more than your natural limitations define yours. Seraphina's amber eyes glistened with something that might have been tears. In all the months since the attack, no one had spoken for her like this. Her own people loved her, but they saw her as a tragic figure to be pitied. The other delegates saw her as weak. But this human, this stranger, saw her as she truly was. Furthermore, Marcus continued, his voice taking on the steel of a career military officer, anyone who thinks that physical limitations automatically equal mental or professional limitations has clearly never served in combat. Some of the best strategic minds I've ever known were people who couldn't walk, couldn't see, couldn't hear. They compensated by developing other abilities to levels that would astonish you. The chamber was completely silent now. Even the usual background, chittering and humming of various species had stopped. Ambassador Seraphina negotiated the Celestial Accords, which prevented a war between the hegemony and the free worlds that would have cost billions of lives. She brokered the trade agreement that brought prosperity to the Outer Rim colonies. She's personally responsible for at least 12 major diplomatic breakthroughs in the past decade. None of that was accomplished with her wings. It was accomplished with her mind, her experience, and her determination. Marcus moved back to stand beside Seraphina's platform. If this council is so short-sighted that it would dismiss one of the galaxy's finest diplomatic minds because she needs physical assistance, then perhaps the problem isn't with Ambassador Seraphina. Perhaps the problem is with the council itself. The silence stretched on for long moments. Finally, Chancellor Vorth spoke, his voice thoughtful. The human delegate raises valid points. However, practical concerns remain. The ambassador's condition does present certain logistical challenges. Challenges that can be solved, Marcus said immediately. If the council is willing to make reasonable accommodations, just as it already does for every other species' special needs. And who would provide these accommodations? Asked the hegemony's representative, a towering insectoid creature. The Draconian Empire has made no such requests. Marcus looked at Seraphina. seeing the hope flickering in her amber eyes alongside the fear of disappointment. He'd come this far. Time to go all in. "I will," he said simply. The chamber exploded in surprised vocalizations. Marcus raised his voice to be heard over the din. "The human delegation formally requests permission to provide assistance to Ambassador Serafina for the duration of these negotiations. I volunteer to serve as her aide, to handle any physical requirements that arise." Serafina's massive head turned toward him, her eyes wide with shock. You would do this? You barely know me." Marcus met her gaze steadily. "I know enough. I know you're here fighting for your people despite everything that's happened to you. I know you haven't given up. Even when it would have been easier to, that tells me everything I need to know about who you are." The Draconian delegation was conferring frantically among themselves. Prince Valdris, Serafina's nephew and the delegation's nominal head, finally stood. "The Draconian Empire is grateful for the human offer, but we cannot ask this of you. The responsibility would be enormous, and the political implications." "With respect, Your Highness," Marcus interrupted, "you're not asking. I'm offering. And as for political implications, sometimes doing the right thing is more important than political calculations." Chancellor Vorth's tentacles writhed in what Marcus had learned was the mollusk equivalent of deep thought. "This is highly irregular. An aide from one species serving another species delegate, but not unprecedented," Marcus said quickly. "Article 15 of the Council Charter allows for cross-species cooperation in diplomatic functions. The Aquatic Coalition used crystalline translators for the first 5 years of their membership. The hive mind species still use mechanical interfaces provided by the Tech Union." Serafina's voice was barely a whisper. "Please, I can't walk or fly." The words that had haunted her for months came out broken, vulnerable. "I cannot do this alone." The admission hung in the air like a physical thing. Here was one of the galaxy's proudest species' greatest diplomat reduced to begging for help. The cruelty of it was almost unbearable. Marcus stepped closer to her platform. "You're not alone," he said firmly. "And you don't have to beg. Needing help isn't a weakness, it's just a fact. Let me be your wings." The silence that followed was different from before. It wasn't the shocked silence of political upheaval, but the thoughtful quiet of minds changing. Marcus could see it happening around the chamber as delegates reconsidered their assumptions. Finally, Chancellor Vorth spoke. "The Council will recess for 1 hour to consider this request. When we reconvene, we will vote on whether to accept the human offer of assistance and proceed with Ambassador Serafina's full participation in these negotiations." As the various delegates began filing out of the chamber, many cast curious glances at the unlikely pair. Serafina remained on her platform, tears now flowing freely down her magnificent face. "Why?" she whispered to Marcus as the chamber emptied. "Your species gains nothing from helping me. You could even lose influence by associating with what others see as weakness." Marcus smiled. Remembering his old squad leader who'd lost both legs to an IED, but had gone on to become one of the best tactical instructors in the Space Marines. "Where I come from, we don't abandon our teammates just because they're wounded. And as of today, you're my teammate." For the first time in 6 months, Serafina smiled. It was a dragon's smile, full of teeth and fire. And Marcus realized that perhaps the Council was about to learn that there were different kinds of strength, and that the combination of draconian wisdom and human stubbornness might be more formidable than anyone imagined. He vote had been closer than Marcus had hoped, but decisive enough to matter. 26 species voted in favor, 18 against, with 3 abstentions. Ambassador Serafina would remain as the primary draconian delegate, with Marcus serving as her official aide. The arrangement was unprecedented, but then again, so was much of what humanity had brought to the galactic stage. Now, 3 days into the negotiations, Marcus was beginning to understand just what he'd signed up for. The Andromedean trade route dispute wasn't just about shipping lanes and tariffs. It was about power, territory, and the fundamental question of who would control access to the galaxy's newest and most resource-rich region. "The morning briefings are ready," Marcus said quietly, wheeling the specially designed mobile platform that had been constructed for Seraphina. The Dragon's massive form was supported by a sophisticated anti-gravity system that allowed her to move through the station's corridors with dignity. More importantly, it could elevate her to different heights during negotiations, ensuring she could still use her imposing presence effectively. "Thank you, Marcus," Seraphina replied, her voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who'd been working 18-hour days. "What's our biggest concern today?" Marcus consulted his tablet as they moved toward the private conference room where the day's preliminary meetings would take place. "The hegemony is pushing hard for exclusive mining rights to the Kepler Nebula. They're arguing that their military protected the initial survey teams, so they deserve primary access." "Typical hegemony logic," Seraphina growled, a small puff of smoke escaping her nostrils. "Take credit for protection that was never requested and use it to justify theft." Over the past 3 days, Marcus had gained a deep appreciation for Seraphina's diplomatic mind. She saw patterns and connections that escaped others, understood the subtle interplay of politics and economics that drove galactic affairs. Her paralysis hadn't diminished her intellectual capabilities one bit, but he could see how the constant need to justify her presence was wearing on her. They entered the conference room where several other delegations were already assembled. The morning preliminary sessions were supposed to be informal, a chance for delegates to discuss positions before the formal afternoon negotiations. In practice, they were often where the real deals were made. Ambassador Crickthole looked up as they entered, his feathers ruffling slightly. The Zephyrian had made his displeasure with the Council's decision abundantly clear, but protocol demanded civility. "Ambassador Seraphina, Mr. Chen. I trust you've had time to review the latest hegemony proposal?" "We have," Seraphina replied, settling into position at the conference table. Marcus took his place slightly behind and to her left, close enough to assist, but positioned to show he wasn't speaking for her. "And we find it as lacking in merit as their previous 17 proposals." A ripple of what might have been amusement passed through the room. The Mollusk Confederation's representative, a smaller cousin of Chancellor Vorth named Glix, bubbled quietly. "The Draconians maintain their reputation for directness. When the truth is direct, why obscure it with diplomacy?" Seraphina asked, though her tone remained perfectly diplomatic despite her words. "The hegemony's proposal would give them 70% of the Andromedean mining rights in exchange for military protection services that the region neither needs nor wants." The hegemony's delegate, General Thexmore, leaned forward aggressively. His species, the Krulon, were large, heavily armored creatures that had evolved from pack hunters. Subtlety wasn't their strength. "The Outer Rim regions are notoriously unstable. Pirate activity, rogue AI collectives, dimensional anomalies. Military protection isn't just advisable, it's essential." Marcus watched Seraphina's amber eyes narrow slightly. This was the opening they'd been waiting for. "General, you raise an interesting point about pirate activity," Seraphina said smoothly. "Perhaps you could explain why hegemony forces were notably absent when Ambassador Crickthole's trade convoy was attacked near the Vega system last month, or when the Crystalline Research Station came under assault by the Red Star pirates just 2 weeks ago." The room went very quiet. Crickthole's feathers stood on end, while the crystalline delegate Zixendor's harmonic resonance shifted to a frequency that Marcus had learned indicated anger. General Thexmore's mandibles clicked rapidly. Those incidents were outside our patrol routes. We cannot be everywhere at once." "Of course not," Serafina agreed pleasantly. "But they were well within the patrol routes you've proposed for the Andromedean region. So either your military forces are insufficient to provide the protection you're claiming to offer, or they're selectively unavailable when it comes to protecting species who haven't agreed to your terms." Marcus suppressed a smile. This was Serafina at her finest, using logic like a precision weapon. He could see other delegates reconsidering their positions as her words sank in. "Furthermore," she continued, "the Draconian Empire has reviewed the incident reports from both attacks. In each case, the pirates seemed remarkably well informed about convoy routes and security measures, almost as if they had advance intelligence." The accusation hung in the air like a poison cloud. Marcus watched General Thexmore's body language shift from aggressive to defensive. The hegemony had always been suspected of having arrangements with certain pirate groups, using them as unofficial enforcers of their economic policies. "That's a serious accusation, Ambassador," Glix bubbled nervously. "Do you have evidence to support such a claim?" Serafina's smile was all teeth and fire. "Not yet. But the Draconian Empire is prepared to share our intelligence assets with any species willing to conduct a joint investigation. Full transparency, open records, collaborative analysis. It was a brilliant move. The hegemony couldn't object to an investigation without looking guilty, but they also couldn't afford to have their operations scrutinized too closely. Meanwhile, the other species would see the offer of shared intelligence as exactly the kind of cooperation they wanted in the Andromedean region. Marcus leaned forward slightly, just enough to catch Serafina's peripheral vision. She nodded almost imperceptibly, understanding his signal. "The human delegation would be honored to contribute to such an investigation," Marcus said, speaking for the first time in the session. "Earth's intelligence services have been tracking pirate activity throughout the region as part of our merchant marine protection efforts." General Thexmore's attention snapped to Marcus with uncomfortable intensity. "The human species has been in space for barely 2 decades. What could your intelligence possibly tell us that our centuries of experience have not?" It was exactly the dismissive attitude Marcus had been hoping for. "Sometimes a fresh perspective can be valuable, General. For instance, our analysis suggests that the pirate attacks follow a pattern that becomes obvious once you map them against proposed hegemony trade routes." Marcus activated his tablet's holographic projector, displaying a 3-dimensional map of the disputed region. Red dots marked pirate attacks over the past year, while green lines showed the hegemony's proposed shipping routes. Every major pirate attack in the past 12 months occurred along routes that would compete with hegemony shipping, Marcus explained, highlighting the correlation. Meanwhile, hegemony convoys have suffered remarkably few incidents despite carrying some of the region's most valuable cargo. The silence in the room was deafening. Even Ambassador Crichthole, who had been vocal in his opposition to human involvement, was staring at the display with obvious interest. "This could be coincidence," Zixandor chimed, though his harmonic frequency suggested skepticism even of his own words. "Absolutely," Serafina agreed, "which is why a proper investigation would be so valuable. If it's coincidence, the investigation will prove the hegemony's innocence and strengthen their position. If it's not—" She let the implication hang. General Thexmore was trapped and he knew it. Opposing the investigation would be as good as a confession, but allowing it would expose operations the hegemony desperately wanted to keep hidden. "The hegemony has nothing to hide," he said finally, his voice tight with controlled anger. "We welcome any investigation that will expose the true threats to regional security." "Excellent," Serafina purred. "Then I propose we establish a joint task force to investigate these incidents and develop comprehensive security recommendations for the Andromedean region. A truly collaborative approach to protection rather than a unilateral military occupation." Marcus watched the other delegates' reactions carefully. This was the moment when theoretical support would either translate into practical cooperation or dissolve into political maneuvering. Glix was the first to speak. The Mollusk Confederation supports this proposal. We've long advocated for shared responsibility in frontier security. The Crystalline Assembly agrees, Zixandor added, his harmonics now indicating enthusiasm. Our recent experiences with pirate attacks make this investigation personally relevant. One by one, the other delegations added their support. Even Ambassador Crickthole, despite his obvious reluctance, eventually agreed. The political momentum was overwhelming. General Thexmore realized he was completely isolated. The hegemony will participate in this investigation, of course, though we maintain that our original proposal remains the most practical solution for regional security. Of course, Serafina agreed diplomatically, and the investigation's findings will certainly inform our final decisions about security arrangements. As the meeting broke up, Marcus could see the satisfaction in Serafina's eyes. They'd managed to shift the entire framework of the negotiations from the hegemony's military dominance to cooperative investigation and shared security. It was a masterful piece of diplomatic maneuvering. But as they left the conference room, Marcus noticed General Thexmore speaking quietly with several other delegates, his body language suggesting urgent private conversation. The hegemony wasn't going to accept this setback gracefully. "Well played," Marcus said quietly as they moved through the corridors toward their private office. But Thexmore looked like he was planning something. Serafina's expression was thoughtful. He was. The hegemony doesn't abandon objectives easily. They'll try to undermine the investigation before it can begin, probably by questioning the credibility of the task force members. "Meaning us," Marcus said. "Meaning me, specifically," Serafina corrected. "My condition makes me an easy target. They'll argue that I'm not physically capable of overseeing an investigation, that my judgment has been compromised by my injuries, that the Draconian Empire is using me as a figurehead while making decisions behind the scenes." Marcus felt his jaw clench. "Let them try. We'll be ready." "Will we?" Serafina asked, genuine uncertainty in her voice for the first time since the negotiations had begun. "Marcus, I'm grateful beyond words for everything you've done. But perhaps they're right. Perhaps I am compromised. These past months, there are times when the pain makes it hard to think clearly. Times when the frustration and anger cloud my judgment." They had reached their private office, and Marcus closed the door behind them before responding. The office had been specially configured for Serafina's needs, with raised platforms, specialized workstations, and direct neural interfaces that allowed her to access information systems without requiring manual input. "Serafina," Marcus said, his voice gentle but firm, "in the past 3 days, I've watched you outmaneuver some of the galaxy's most experienced politicians. You've identified patterns that escaped everyone else, anticipated political moves before they happened, and just orchestrated a complete reversal of the negotiating framework. If that's what you call compromised, then I'd hate to see you at full capacity." "But they're not wrong about the physical limitations," she said, settling onto her platform with a sigh that seemed to come from her very soul. "I can't inspect sites personally. I can't travel to remote locations for witness interviews. I can't even stand up to address the full council without assistance." Marcus was quiet for a moment, thinking about his old squad leader again, about the conversations they'd had in the hospital after his injuries. Finally, he spoke. "You know what the difference is between accommodation and compensation? Accommodation is what you need to function despite limitations. Compensation is what you develop to function because of limitations. Every limitation forces you to find new strengths." He gestured to her workstation, where multiple data streams were flowing across holographic displays. "You can't inspect sites personally, so you've become the best remote analyst I've ever seen. You can't travel for interviews, so you've mastered the art of reading people through communications systems. You can't stand to address the council, but when you speak from that platform, every word carries more weight because everyone knows what it cost you to be there. Serafina was quiet, processing his words. Outside their office, the sounds of the space station continued, the hum of life support systems and the distant chatter of other delegations preparing for the afternoon session. "There's something else," Marcus said, making a decision he'd been wrestling with since the morning briefing. "Something I didn't mention in the meeting because I wanted to discuss it with you first." "What is it?" Marcus activated his secure tablet, displaying a new analysis he'd been working on. "I've been digging deeper into the pirate attack patterns, and I found something interesting. The timing of your attack 6 months ago, it wasn't random." Serafina's amber eyes sharpened with sudden attention. "Explain." "Your attack happened exactly 3 days before you were scheduled to begin preliminary negotiations for the Andromedan trade agreements. The pirates used a neural disruptor, a weapon that would incapacitate you without killing you. And the attack location was precisely calculated to ensure you'd survive long enough to be rescued, but not long enough to avoid permanent damage." The implications hit Serafina like a physical blow. "They weren't trying to kill me. They were trying to remove me from the negotiations." "More than that," Marcus continued grimly. "They were trying to prove that the galaxy's greatest diplomat could be reduced to helplessness. They wanted to make an example of you, to show that even the mighty dragons could be broken." Serafina's entire body went rigid with fury. Small wisps of smoke began curling from her nostrils, and her eyes blazed with inner fire. "The hegemony. I can't prove it yet," Marcus admitted, "but the weapon, the timing, the tactical precision, it all points to someone with detailed intelligence about your movements and access to experimental military technology." "Then we prove it," Serafina said, her voice carrying the dangerous edge that had once made entire star systems reconsider their aggressive policies. "We use this investigation to expose not just their pirate connections, but their attack on me." "Are you sure you're ready for that?" Marcus asked. "It's going to mean reliving the attack, testifying about what happened, possibly facing the beings responsible for your condition." Serafina looked at him for a long moment, and Marcus saw something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Not just determination or anger, but a kind of peace. The peace that came from finally understanding the true nature of the battle you were fighting. "Marcus," she said quietly, "for 6 months, I've been fighting the wrong enemy. I thought I was fighting my disability, fighting to prove I could still function despite my limitations. But the real enemy was always the ones who put me in this position in the first place." She lifted her great head, and for a moment, Marcus could see the diplomat who had negotiated peace between star systems, the dragon who had stared down warlords and made them blink first. "They wanted to break me," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "They wanted to make me a symbol of helplessness, proof that even the strongest could be reduced to nothing. But they made one crucial mistake." "What's that?" Serafina's smile was pure dragon, all teeth and fire and absolute certainty. "They left me alive, and they gave me the best partner I could have asked for." Marcus felt a surge of pride and determination. They were no longer just trying to participate in trade negotiations. They were hunting the beings who had tried to destroy one of the galaxy's greatest minds. The afternoon session was going to be very interesting indeed. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been called for 0800 station time, but delegates had been arriving since before dawn. Word had leaked that the Joint Investigation Task Force had uncovered something significant, and the political rumor mill had been working overtime. Marcus could feel the tension crackling through the chamber's atmosphere like electricity before a storm. He made final adjustments to Serafina's platform positioning, ensuring she had optimal sight lines to every major delegation. Today wasn't just about presenting evidence. It was about watching reactions, reading the micro-expressions and body language that would tell them who had known what and when. The neural interface is calibrated and ready, Marcus reported quietly. All evidence files are loaded and standing by for presentation. Serafina nodded, her amber eyes focused and sharp. The past week of investigation had been intense, with delegations from 12 different species contributing intelligence, analysis, and expertise. What they had uncovered was more damning than even Marcus had initially suspected. "Remember," she said, her voice pitched for his ears alone, "today we're not just seeking justice for what happened to me. We're exposing a threat to the entire galactic community." Chancellor Vorth's massive bulk settled onto his presiding platform, tentacles writhing with barely contained agitation. "The Council recognizes the Joint Investigation Task Force. Ambassador Serafina, you may begin your presentation." Serafina's platform rose smoothly to its maximum height, putting her at eye level with even the largest delegates. Her voice, when she spoke, carried clearly throughout the chamber without amplification, a testament to the natural projection abilities that had made her such an effective speaker. "Honored delegates, what began as an investigation into regional pirate activity has revealed something far more sinister. We have uncovered evidence of a systematic campaign of terrorism, economic manipulation, and political assassination attempts spanning the past 18 months. The chamber erupted in shocked vocalizations. Marcus activated the primary holographic display system, filling the air above the assembly with a three-dimensional star map marked with incident locations, dates, and attack patterns. "The attacks we initially examined were not random pirate raids," Serafina continued, her voice cutting through the noise. "They were precision strikes designed to eliminate specific political and economic obstacles to hegemony expansion into the Andromedian region." General Thexmore shot to his feet, his mandibles clicking rapidly. "This is outrageous. The hegemony will not sit here and listen to unfounded accusations based on circumstantial evidence." "Please, General, remain seated," Chancellor Vorth commanded, his voice carrying the authority of his office. "Ambassador Serafina has the floor. You will have your opportunity to respond." Serafina waited for quiet before continuing. "The evidence is far from circumstantial. Task Force investigators have recovered communication intercepts, financial records, and most damning of all, the actual neural disruptor weapon used in my attack." Marcus felt a surge of satisfaction as gasps echoed throughout the chamber. The weapon's recovery had been the breakthrough they needed, discovered in a raid on a pirate base that the Mollusk Confederation's intelligence services had tracked down using human analytical methods. The neural disruptor bears manufacturing signatures that trace directly to hegemony military research facilities, Serafina announced. Furthermore, the weapon's activation codes match those found in encrypted communications between hegemony intelligence operatives and known pirate groups. The holographic display shifted to show manufacturing analysis, molecular signatures, and code comparisons. The evidence was overwhelming, presented with the precision that had made Serafina legendary in diplomatic circles. Ambassador Krickthol's feathers were standing at full attention, a sign of extreme agitation in his species. "Are you saying that the hegemony deliberately orchestrated the attack on your person?" "I'm saying that the evidence clearly indicates hegemony involvement in a campaign of targeted violence against diplomatic personnel," Serafina replied carefully. "The attack on me was part of a larger pattern designed to eliminate opposition to their territorial expansion." Marcus watched General Thexmore's body language, noting the subtle signs of preparation for either fight or flight. The Krulon military leader was trapped, and dangerous animals were most unpredictable when cornered. "This is all fabricated," Thexmore roared, his composure finally cracking. "Faked evidence designed to discredit the hegemony's legitimate security concerns. The humans have corrupted this investigation from the beginning." It was exactly the response Serafina had predicted. Attack the investigators when you couldn't attack the evidence. General, Serafina said, her voice remaining perfectly calm. Are you suggesting that 12 different species conspired to fabricate evidence against the hegemony? That would require a level of coordination and cooperation that frankly gives me more faith in galactic unity than I've had in years. Nervous laughter rippled through the chamber. Even in the midst of presenting devastating evidence, Serafina couldn't resist a diplomatic joke. The task force investigation was conducted according to strict protocols established by the Council itself, Marcus added, speaking for the first time in the formal session. Every piece of evidence has been verified by multiple independent sources. The chain of custody has been maintained according to galactic legal standards. And what would a human know about galactic legal standards? Thexmore snarled, turning his attention to Marcus with predatory intensity. Your species has been in space for barely 20 years. You're not qualified to interpret evidence of this complexity. Marcus had been expecting this attack, too. He stood slowly, letting his full height and military bearing make their own statement. You're absolutely right, General. Humans are relatively new to galactic politics, which is exactly why our analysis is so valuable. The chamber quieted, delegates leaning forward to hear his explanation. Established species often have long histories with each other, old alliances, ancient grudges, traditional ways of thinking about problems. Humans don't have that baggage. We can look at evidence objectively, without centuries of political context clouding our judgment. Marcus gestured to the holographic display. When we mapped these attacks, we didn't see the complex web of territorial disputes and trade agreements that other species might focus on. We saw what was actually there. A clear pattern of violence designed to achieve specific political outcomes. Furthermore, he continued, his voice taking on the steel of absolute certainty, the investigation wasn't conducted by humans alone. The weapon analysis was performed by crystalline specialists. The communication intercepts were decoded by mollusk cryptographers. The financial records were traced by Zephyrian economic experts. Every major finding has been independently verified by the very species the hegemony claims we're conspiring against. The logic was unassailable, and Marcus could see it hitting home with delegates throughout the chamber. General Thexmore's mandibles clicked frantically as he searched for another line of attack. Even if some evidence exists, he said finally, his voice lacking its earlier conviction, this proves nothing about official hegemony policy, rogue operatives, unauthorized activities, criminal elements operating without government sanction. An interesting theory, Serafina interrupted smoothly, which is why we also investigated the command structure behind these operations. The holographic display shifted again, this time showing an organizational chart that made several delegates gasp audibly. Names, ranks, and connection lines mapped out a conspiracy that reached to the highest levels of the hegemony military hierarchy. The neural disruptor attack on my person was authorized by Admiral Corksthul of the Hegemony Third Fleet, Serafina announced, her voice carrying absolute conviction. The order was countersigned by Defense Minister Vexamore. The operation was funded through a black budget account that traces directly to the Hegemony High Command. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus could see General Thexmore's carapace literally trembling as the implications hit home. This wasn't just about rogue operatives anymore. This was about the hegemony government itself. Chancellor Vorth's tentacles writhed in what Marcus had learned was extreme distress. Ambassador Serafina, these are extraordinarily serious accusations. You're alleging that the hegemony government ordered the assassination attempt on a diplomatic representative. I'm presenting evidence that speaks for itself, Serafina replied. The task force recommends that the Council take appropriate action to ensure such attacks cannot happen again. What kind of action? Asked Glix, his bubbly voice tense with worry. Marcus stepped forward, knowing this was the moment they'd been building toward. The human delegation proposes the establishment of a permanent diplomatic protection force, with representatives from multiple species and direct authority to investigate threats against diplomatic personnel. It was a radical proposal, one that would fundamentally change how galactic diplomacy functioned, but the evidence had created exactly the kind of crisis that made radical changes possible. Furthermore, Serafina added, we recommend immediate sanctions against the hegemony until they can demonstrate that the officials responsible for these attacks have been removed from power and brought to justice. The chamber erupted in debate, with delegates arguing passionately in dozens of different languages and communication methods. Marcus watched General Thexmore carefully, noting the way the Krulon's attention kept shifting toward the chamber's exits. The hegemony demands time to investigate these allegations internally, Thexmore said when the noise finally died down. We cannot accept sanctions based on evidence we have not had the opportunity to verify independently. Of course, Serafina agreed readily. The task force recommends a 30-day period for the hegemony to conduct their internal investigation and report back to the council. During that time, all hegemony military forces should withdraw from the Andromedean region to ensure they cannot interfere with the ongoing diplomatic process. It was a masterstroke. By appearing reasonable and allowing for hegemony input, Serafina had made it politically impossible for them to refuse without looking guilty. At the same time, the withdrawal requirement would effectively end their military pressure campaign. 30 days is insufficient, Thexmore protested. These are complex allegations that will require extensive investigation. Then perhaps the hegemony should have thought of that before authorizing attacks on diplomatic personnel, Ambassador Crickthole said sharply, his feathers rustling with indignation. The Zephyrian's attitude toward the proceedings had changed dramatically as the evidence mounted. Marcus could see the political momentum building against the hegemony. Species that had been neutral or even supportive were now viewing them with suspicion and anger. The revelation that diplomatic immunity could be violated with impunity had shaken the fundamental assumptions that made galactic diplomacy possible. I call for a formal vote, Zixandor chimed, his harmonic frequency resonating with determination. All in favor of accepting the task force recommendations and implementing the proposed sanctions and protection measures. The vote wasn't even close. 41 species voted in favor, with only the hegemony and their two closest allies voting against. 3 abstentions. It was an overwhelming repudiation of hegemony actions and policies. As the chamber began to empty, General Thexmore approached Serafina's platform, his body language radiating barely controlled fury. Marcus tensed, ready to intervene if necessary. This isn't over, Thexmore hissed quietly. You think you've won, but you've only made yourself a bigger target. The next attack won't leave you alive to testify. Before Marcus could respond, Serafina's great head turned toward the Krulon general, her amber eyes blazing with inner fire. When she spoke, her voice carried the full weight of draconic authority. General, she said softly, I want you to think very carefully about what you just said. You've just threatened a diplomatic representative in front of witnesses in the Galactic Council chambers, immediately after being presented with evidence of your government's involvement in similar attacks. Thexmore's mandibles clicked as he realized his mistake. Furthermore, Serafina continued, you seem to be laboring under a fundamental misunderstanding. You think you broke me 6 months ago. You think you reduced me to helplessness, made me dependent on others, turned me into a symbol of weakness. Her platform rose to its maximum height, putting her magnificent head level with Thexmore's own. But you accomplished the opposite. You gave me clarity. You stripped away everything except what truly matters, the pursuit of justice, the defense of the innocent, and the protection of the diplomatic process that keeps our galaxy from tearing itself apart. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. This was Serafina at her most dangerous, not despite her disability, but because of what it had taught her. "You also," she concluded, "gave me the best partner I could have asked for." Marcus Chen represents everything admirable about the human species: loyalty, determination, and the absolute refusal to abandon those who need help. She turned her attention to Marcus, and he saw pride, gratitude, and genuine affection in her amber eyes. "Together we've proven that strength comes in many forms, that adaptation breeds innovation, and that the cooperation between species can accomplish what no single government could achieve alone." General Thexmore backed away from the platform, his predatory confidence replaced by something approaching fear. He had expected to face a broken diplomat supported by a naive human. Instead, he had encountered something far more formidable: a partnership forged in adversity and tempered by shared purpose. As Thexmore retreated from the chamber, Marcus helped Serafina lower her platform back to normal height. Around them, other delegations were already discussing implementation of the new protection protocols and the long-term implications of the hegemony sanctions. "Well," Marcus said quietly, "I think that went about as well as we could have hoped." Serafina laughed, a sound like distant thunder mixed with wind chimes. "Better than I dared hope when I first pleaded for help that day. Marcus, I owe you more than I can ever repay." "You don't owe me anything," Marcus replied firmly. "We're partners. That's what partners do for each other." As they left the chamber together, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. 3 weeks ago, Serafina had been a broken diplomat struggling to maintain her dignity in the face of discrimination and doubt. Today, she was the architect of the most significant reform in diplomatic security in galactic history. The attack that was meant to end her career had instead launched a new phase of her life, one defined not by what she had lost, but by what she had gained. A deeper understanding of justice, a broader perspective on strength and weakness, and a partnership that had proven more powerful than either of them could have imagined alone. "So what's next?" Marcus asked as they walked through the station corridors toward their office. "Next," Serafina said, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who had not just won a battle, but changed the rules of war. "We make sure this never happens to anyone else. The galaxy is about to learn that attacking diplomats isn't just wrong, it's strategically stupid." Marcus smiled, remembering his old squad leader's favorite saying about wounded warriors becoming the most dangerous enemies. The galaxy had created something new when they tried to destroy Serafina. A diplomat who understood both the value of cooperation and the necessity of strength, supported by a species that refused to abandon their teammates. It was going to be very interesting to see what they accomplished next. Behind them, the great chamber of the Galactic Council stood empty except for the cleaning crews preparing for the next day's sessions. But the changes set in motion today would ripple outward for generations, touching every species and every world in the galaxy. Sometimes, Marcus thought, the most important victories were the ones that prevented future battles from ever being necessary. And sometimes, the best way to honor those who had been broken was to make sure no one else would suffer the same fate. The paralyzed dragon diplomat and the human veteran walked into their shared future, partners in the truest sense of the word, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead.